Okay.
Thank you.
Well, it won't. It might not make a lot of sense without the chart because I'm going to refer to it in a bit. Well, what I wanted to talk about, the idea, the title, Action Without Actors, is, a version of Thoughts Without Thinkers, which was in Selfless Souls. And the focus is on the issue of Anatan, not self, and trying to figure out just what is going on. I think I had a, I had a,
Did you
I
say
took a,
you put it on the chat?
yeah, if you go to the chat,
It's
if you
it's
click
not
chat at the,
there. Only Mary Helen's message.
oh, well, Mary, Mary Helen, who is muted again.
No, it's there. It's at the top. You have to click on the attachment and chat.
Susan, you need to scroll up. Other chat things have pushed it out.
No,
No, well, it's there. It's the
it's
very
not
first
there.
thing in the chat, Tony Bernhard to everyone. Usually scrolling up would do it, but
I don't see it either.
weird.
Huh,
It's the
that's weird.
wonderfulness of Zoom. I'll
Nice.
put it up when we come to it so you can follow along, and then you can get it from Mary Helen or somebody.
Yes, we can mail it out to you.
You may find it totally irritating, and you might not want to have it around.
The irritating chart.
And irritating. I don't want to look at that. That gets on my nerves. Have you ever seen a PowerPoint slide like that? So I took a class from Jay Garfield, who is a professor of philosophy at Smith and is a major commentator on Tibetan. He hangs out with the Dalai Lama. He's a top, world class scholar, and he did a class on persons and selves and at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. And the big takeaway from that class, and I've been reading Garfield for years, but the takeaway from that class was that the illusion we have of ourself is a mental illusion in the same way that an optical illusion is an optical illusion. You can know that an optical illusion is an illusion, but you can't help seeing it. So let me share this screen. You see that box there with the gray bar? Is that
Yeah.
up for you guys?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that gray bar is this color, the median color, all the way across. If you take a screenshot of it, you can see that it's the same all the way across, but against the light background it appears dark. Against the dark background it appears light. But it's the same all the way across. If you block out everything but that bar, hold your fingers up and you'll see that it's the same all the way across. Even so, you may know that it's the same all the way across. Can you see that one? Is that one visible for you guys?
Yes.
That's the bar. I took a picture of the bar. It's the same all the way across.
Yeah.
Okay. But even though you know it's the same all the way across, you look at that and you still see it. Right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, the self is an illusion in that way. It's like a mirage. If you see a mirage out in the desert and it's blue, and you think it's water, it does look like water. And even when you understand that it's really light from the sky refracted or reflected off the whichever, bounced off the rising heat, a heat gradient, and you see the reflected blue sky and you know it's not water, you still see it. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So knowing that the self is an illusion doesn't mean that you won't continue to see the self. The trick is to have a different understanding, a parallel understanding that doesn't require you to think of yourself as an agent. That to recognize that you're not doing anything, it's all just happening according to causes and conditions. So we need a model, we need a map for how to understand our behavior. Because we talk about, I do this and I do that, I think this and I think that. But one of the things that I used to really enjoy at the prison was I'd ask the guys if they, if they thought they were doing their thinking. And they said, of course. And so I said, okay, if you're doing your thinking, can you stop your thinking? And, well, sure. Well, let's take a minute and do that. And of course, none of them could. And it was a very dramatic demonstration of how the thought process it's just unfolding on its own according to whatever conditions and causes are ambient at the moment. Right? The neuroscience people will also tell you that our intentions are the same, that the intentions arise before we're aware of them, and then we sort of jump on board. There's a scene in Tom Wolfe's book, I Am Charlotte Simmons, where he follows her into a classroom at Duke, and the professor says, we're like this. You toss a pebble across the room, and it's in flight, and it becomes conscious. And it says, I want to go that way, which is sort of what happens to us. An intention arises, and we go, I want to do that. But we've all seen from our mindfulness practice that we can actually observe those intentions arising once in a while and not take that trip and just observe. So the idea here, and with this chart that we're going to go through, is that it's an alternative map of experience to action that doesn't require a self, that doesn't require an agent. In fact, the idea of an agent, that's just an illusion. These things just unfold on their own. And we're going to take a look at an alternative map. It's like understanding the mirage that you see in terms of reflected light rather than in terms of water. So does that make sense? So I'm going to bring the chart up. You guys see the chart there?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try to open my window here on the side so I can see everybody. Okay. So this is actually just my version of dependent origination. So I'm really not taking a whole lot of credit for it, but it does put a number of different teachings together. And the idea is that we're going to look at the way we get from experience, at bottom square in the middle there, up to speech, action, and livelihood, which can be skillful or unskillful, depending on the path we take here. These columns here, this reflects these elements in the Satipatthana and the mindfulness foundation of mindfulness practice, and over here it establishes these same elements in the paradigm of the skandhas. If please unmute yourself and interrupt me and say, what are you talking about, if I'm not clear? So please feel free to, I don't mind being interrupted. So let's just start from here, from the bottom, which is experience. Our experience can be at the 5 sense doors, physical experience, touch, taste, smell, etc. But it can also be mental, it can be a thought. So your experience can be Well, we can have a thought of our past president, and of course, reactivity to it happens automatically. But so you can have a mental object which generates a reaction, physical or mental. Our experience is at the five sense gates. In the dependent origination linkage, it's nama rupa, name, form, not name and form, it's name, form. It's the two of them together. So we have experience, and the experience comes with a feeling tone. Every moment of experience comes with a feeling tone, pleasant or unpleasant. And that's not something that we have anything to do with. If it's very hot, we find it unpleasant, you know, or if it's 80 degrees and balmy, sort of Hawaii weather, we find it very pleasant. Pleasant and unpleasant. The thoughts of public figures, some are pleasant, some are unpleasant. So all experience comes with a feeling tone. Now, if we go up the left side here, the purple bubbles, we're in the realm of the second noble truth, which is the origin of suffering. And here it's outlined in terms of greed, hatred, and delusion. So we've got greed, hatred, and delusion. In the Buddha's typology, in the Four Noble Truths, you have tanha as the second truth, which is given to be the origin of suffering. But the Buddha also used a paradigm of the asavas, which was actually the first formulation of this underlying condition, and the anusias, which were translated as underlying conditions. So let me describe this a little bit. Suppose, just imagine you wake up in the morning and you look at your clock and, oh my God, you're 45 minutes late and you've got an important something coming up, and you ever been there? And then the next thing you notice is that everything you do is speeded up. You don't have to, you squirt the toothbrush on the tube and you don't brush quite so much, and you throw you know what I mean? Everything gets speeded up, and it all had to do with that first underlying commitment. That you're late. You know what I mean? It can be something deeper. Suppose you are a child and you see Serena Williams playing tennis, and you say, oh my gosh, I want to do that. Then your whole life becomes oriented towards picking and choosing, and it's all based on a deep commitment. But in the course of doing a practice session, you don't necessarily recall that deep commitment. That deep commitment is operative anyway. You know what I mean? Where is that operative? What part of your subjective experience? Where does it appear? Where does it occur? Suppose you have a preference for vanilla ice cream instead of chocolate, or vice versa. Do you have a preference between ice cream and Brussels sprouts? Where is that preference in the preference itself? Where does that live? It's sort of what the neuroscientist David Eagleman, called under the hood. It's subconscious. It's below our awareness. It's outside of our awareness. Our neurology is paying attention to our environment, to thought streams, but not to everything. One of the things that I find interesting to do is how I'm emptying the dishwasher. I'm not directing my hands. They move the silverware here and there, and it just happens on its own. You can tie your shoes without having to give instructions to your fingers. You can ride a bike and not be able to articulate how you do that. So these are levels of knowledge that exist, levels of awareness that exist, but not in consciousness. So these elements here, the second noble truth, tanha, thirst, craving, the asavas or the anusyas, they live in that subjective place. You know what I'm talking about? It's where does your feeling about our past president come from when I mention him? It comes from where? Subjectively. This is the same place where the Buddha said this is part of our disposition. This is part of the way we're built. And he identified these trends. So I'm going to just go over them just generally. These are kama tanha, kama is the word for sense pleasantness, pleasant sensory experience. Sometimes translated as sensual experience, but it's not just sexual, it's anything pleasant. It's pleasant experience. Kama asava, kama raga anusya. Raga, word for passion. So it's a passion for pleasant experience. You like pleasant experience, don't you? Where does that preference come from? Vibhava, bhava tanha, bhava asava, bhava raga anusya. This is the word bhava is translated as becoming, usually, which I find pretty lame. It's really about keep on keeping on, to become something, to be in the future. It's the survival instinct. It's built into us. We automatically try to save ourselves. If somebody swerves across the highway, we try to save ourselves and get out of the way. It's built in. We don't even have to think about it. And then vibhava tanha, it's interesting, there's no equivalent with the asavas here. Vibhava tanha, if bhava tanha is to keep on keeping on, vibhava tanha is to stop from keeping on. It's what happens when we encounter unpleasant experience. We want to make it go away. Patiga anusya is a slightly different take on the same thing. Patiga translates as anger. So anger and wanting to make something go away, slightly different shades, but they're our disposition, don't we? We want unpleasantness and pain to go away. Anybody not? It's just built into us. And these things generate greed and aversion, or anger, fear, hatred. In shorthand, it's greed, hatred, and delusion. Moha is the word for delusion, and it's usually tougher to track down, but the Buddha talks about it. There's some commonalities here. Ditthi asava and ditthi anusya. This is our tendency to believe our thoughts, to believe our views. Ditthi asava, ditthi anusya. It's the tendency to believe our thoughts. You ever been in a situation where you've been saying, well, this is what's going on, yada, 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 and somebody says, well, what about, and then you realize that you were wrong, and you go, oh, you change your view of things, and you thought you were right, and now we think we're older and wiser. The tendency to believe our thoughts. It's an evolutionary advantage to believe our thoughts, the conceptual map that we have of the way things are. And it's a disposition of our own to believe our thoughts. Avijja asava and avijja anusya. Avijja is the word for ignorance. Actually, it means the same thing as moha. They're referred. They show up in different contexts. But avijja asava, avijja anusya is our tendency to ignorance, to not wanting to know. It's an active disposition. Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, which was a Pulitzer Prize winner in about 1972, you know, is still the work on this. I mean, we just don't, we want to talk about something more pleasant. You know, there's the story about the Hindu god that came down to earth and spent some time and goes back up, and all his buddies up in Hindu god heaven say, what's the story down there? What's the most remarkable thing that you met with? And he says, well, you know, everybody down there is going to die and none of them believe it's going to happen to them. This is our disbelief. It's active. You know, we think things will provide us for satisfaction, that things will stay put, and you know, avija anusio. It's our tendency to prefer not paying attention to our impermanence. And then Vicikiccha is interesting. Vicikiccha is a kind of delusion. Vicikiccha is the fifth of the hindrances. It's translated as doubt, but it doesn't mean doubt as in I don't believe. It's not doubt as in disbelief. It's doubt as in not knowing what to believe. So you don't know whether there is a transcendental nibbana that's beyond you don't know whether there is, and you don't know how to decide, and you sort of, you know, you hold both of them at the same time. Reincarnation or no reincarnation, no self to reincarnate, or how do you hold that? How do you decide? If you don't know, the metaphor is like the donkey that has a bucket of oats on one side and a bucket of corn on the other and doesn't know which to eat, and so dies. So this is about knowing where you stand. Doubt, just not knowing where you stand. And the last one is interesting. Mana anusio. Manas is one of the last of the fetters. It's the fetter of conceit. So mana anusio is the underlying tendency to see a self, to see in terms of self, to see in terms of I am. And this is actually the same illusion that Jay Garfield was pointing at. This tendency to see a self. It's built in, and it makes sense. You know, we've got this incredible evolutionary sense. We have this huge brain as a processor, and it's like, and it maps this experience conceptually. But all that map doesn't help a lot if you don't have, you know, on your GPS, you have that blue dot where you are, and you see how to get from here to there, because that blue dot, which is just a virtual dot. And so the self, in this case, is a virtual event. It's a conceptual event. Delusional, but useful. It's just a virtual event. And it tends to generate greed, hatred, and delusion, which lead to impaired speech, action, and livelihood. These are the three elements of the Eightfold Path. Now, the idea here in this chart is that if one meets pleasant and unpleasant experience with wisdom, which is samaditi, right view, first element of the Eightfold Path, which is defined pretty much as understanding the impermanence of things. I mean, you know, we say, yep, I understand the impermanence of things. But then when you break your favorite cup, you feel bad. You lose your pen. Oh no, I spilled on my favorite shirt. I know things are impermanent, but not the Bill of Rights, not civil society. To understand the unsatisfactoriness of things, to not just to know about it, but to understand it viscerally. That pleasant experience may be pleasant, but it's not going to last. An unpleasant experience, you know, is It's got its own problems. We don't like that for a start. And anatta, the mirage-like nature of self in all things. It's not that we don't see anything. It's just that it's a mirage, and the trick is to try to understand it differently without the necessity of having an agent. But when you see things clearly, what you get is samasankappo, which is right intention, the second element of the Eightfold Path. Nekama, which is renunciation or abandonment of greed, hatred, and delusion. The renunciation of the objects of greed, hatred, and delusion. And then the Brahma Viharas, which are the positive form. And with that, you get right speech, right action, right livelihood. So the difference here between this path and this path is insight. There's no agent that does anything here. The extent to which speech, action, and livelihood are cause suffering or not is reflected in the amount of wisdom that's brought to the action. And so our insight practice constantly deepens our understanding. And as our understanding deepens, we abandon more or less the upadana of greed, hatred, and delusion.
Yep.
This doesn't require an actor. You don't need to see an actor here any more than you need to see an actor in a cloud. A cloud happens, it arises when conditions are right, and when the air warms up, the cloud evaporates. For us, it's not a self, it's just a series of processes being played out through this organism. We have experience which is pleasant or unpleasant. We understand it in a particular way, and depending on whether that understanding is delusional or whether it's enlightened, you could say samadhi, you will generate greed and aversion, greed and hatred, desire, aversion, or right intention and right speech, action, right life, speech, action, livelihood. The Buddha's teachings on the skandhas, this is the sankhara element, and it matches in the satipatthana the attention to the third satipatthana, mindfulness of mind states, greed, hatred, and delusion. Vedana, which is the feeling tone, which is also the second of the foundations of mindfulness. And Rupa, which is the skandha of Rupa, which is physicality, the five senses, the body. Mindfulness of the body is the first foundation. It's where we do mindfulness of breathing. And then Sanya, which is and Ditti, which are perception and view. And it matches the fourth foundation of mindfulness. So that's what this chart is, and it's supposed to be a reminder and a learning aid, a way of imagining how behavior happens without an agent being a part of it. The only thing that changes is the amount of wisdom here. And that you could say the words, we can do something about it. But it also can be described as when there's an understanding present that cultivating insight can lead to a cessation in suffering. That's right view. That view is all that's needed. If you actually think that, you're likely to meditate and practice mindfulness. If you don't, you'll probably do something else. You know what I mean? So we don't need to have an agent. The fact that we see an agent, we experience an agent, is an illusion. This, like explaining a mirage by referring to reflected light off off a heat gradient in the desert. Now, this is a way of interpreting what our experience is in a way that doesn't lead us to act out of an imagined self. The thing is, when you imagine a self, you don't look any farther. Well, when you study the self, Dogen says, when you study the self, to study the self is to forget the self. If you actually look closely, it sort of disappears into just a flowing process. And then every time we grasp, we clutch, and we suffer. So the idea is, certainly a lot of our suffering is rooted around our idea of who we think we are. And then, of course, it's, the second of the fetters, personality view. So let me just, this is more than 30 minutes, and I'm sure you all have gotten the deep import of this chart, and there won't be any questions at all.
It's a great chart.
Please unmute yourself and let's see what's up.
So Tony,